Major funding for this program is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Allied Partners, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, GREENBERG, TRAURIG. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman & Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, MASSEY KNAKAL Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Muss Development LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, PALIN Enterprises, Rosenthal & Rosenthal Inc., Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Studley, Stonehenge Partners, SWIG Equities, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report, Real Estate Trends in the Tri-State Region. The New York City office market is hot. Properties are leasing for as close as $200 a square foot. Vacancies are down. What's going on? We have a credit crisis. We have a little credit turmoil. Today, I have three people who are the pulse of what's going to tell you what's happening in the market. My guests include Mary Ann Tai, CEO of the Tri-State Region of C.B. Richard Ellis, Barry Gosson, CEO globally for Newmark Knight Frank, and last but not least, Jeff Sussman, Executive Vice President at Edward J. Minskoff Equities. We'll forget the ink. So, you know, part of the problem of being in the press, being in the real estate business, I read things and I hear that, you know, the third quarter rents went up to close to $200 a foot. 14 leases were over $150 a foot. Occupancy, you know, vacancy is down to nothing. What's happening? Is it great, or is there a potential risk out there because of the credit crisis? We were talking part of the show. Barry was saying some of the service firms aren't going to be leasing. You know, well, what's happening, Mary Ann?
I think that people have the misperception that there's a direct link between the sales side of the business and the leasing side of the business. I mean, clearly the capital markets drive the sales side of the business. The availability of funds on equity and debt are what make it possible for people to buy. Whereas leasing space is really about employment. I think I heard Barry say that a long time ago, that at the end of the day, it's about, are there jobs out there?
Right, but what were you saying before about employment?
I mean, the market is a derivative of employment. At the end of the day, if you add employees, you'll add demand. If the supply is limited, prices are going to go up. Last year was a good year for employment. There's very little inventory on the market, so that's good for the owners of property. But I mean, there are some clouds in that the numbers in employment, although they are going to probably go up significantly on the payroll side, the household payroll, there are signs that the number of households are not going up. So there are some indications that there's a slowing of employment. So the market may not be as robust, but the fact is there is very little inventory. There's not a lot of space. Companies are still doing pretty well.
But if we're going to have layoffs, and I think many of the financial service firms are going to be laying off some people. Certain of these companies who were planning to possibly rent in your buildings or planning to go somewhere else, they may be just sitting on the sidelines a little longer.
Well, capital projects have stopped, and they're probably going to stop for some period of time. So the financial institutions are not going to expand significantly. But I don't think anyone knows. I don't think the layoffs will be significant enough for them to start throwing space back on the market. You may have envelopes from companies that look like Swiss cheese. There might be pockets of vacant space, but they'll keep that for infill at later dates, and I don't think it'll be put on the market anytime soon. Again, I don't think anyone knows the full extent and the breadth of the exposure to the derivatives market and what this credit crisis fully means, because derivatives are an unregulated business. The subprime is calculable. The SIV market is calculable, and the question is what our additional exposure is and what additional credit problems will some of the banks have. But for the most part, again, it boils down to supply and demand, and the supply side is pretty limited.
And let me just comment about the issue of people putting space on the market too, because I think that people have this notion that suddenly we're going to reduce X number of jobs in our company and immediately we're going to market. To Barry's point, it's like Swiss cheese. First of all, the jobs, if there is a cutback, and at the moment we have no strong indication that it's actually happening. We've heard sort of anecdotal 100 jobs here, 100 jobs there. You need tens of thousands of jobs to be impacted to really impact the numbers. But let me tell you the two reasons why I think you're not going to see people, or actually three, that people aren't going to be rushing to put space on. The first is you have to aggregate it, and that requires capital. You can't just sort of willy-nilly, you know, say, okay, sit over there, people who I'm subleasing to. The second is, under the accounting rules, at the moment you elect to sublease, you've got to take the hit at that moment for whatever space you're putting on the market. And the third is, the market is tight, and as a consequence of being tight, people are loath to be the ones who said, let's sublease the space, and then they need it a year from now, and they're stuck, and they're paying significantly more than they were paying when they first did their lease.
Right now, we have Bank of America building, which next week I'll be talking about because I'm having Douglas Durst on it, I think one floor isn't leased.
That's right.
The New York Times building. We have one floor. One floor. So the only new office building is SJP, 11 Times Square.
That's right. And Boston Properties.
Okay, you have Boston Properties going in on 55th Street, and then you have Boston Properties and Related going in on 47th Street. That's a fact of life. It's happening. It's just a question of when that's happening. So you have those three properties. Some will be on in 2 years. Some of them will be on in 3 years. Then you have the Hudson Yards, which may be 5 years.
2014 is probably the earliest, I think. You're going to see somebody moving in to occupy space.
Okay, and then we have the Trade Center. I mean, so if all of this space comes in, how much space is going to come in the market?
Well, what's the Trade Center? Larry's 3 buildings are 6 and change. Right.
12 million square feet at the Hudson Yards, a total of potentially 28 million square feet.
But how long will it take the Hudson Yards to roll out? If you include that number, Barry, the Western Yards aren't zoned and haven't been through ULURP yet.
You're not going to start building till 2011, most likely 2010 to 2011. So you're not going to see space come on before 2014, 2015.
Right, but you know, we do have people, you know. Okay, Goldman's going to relocate their office, so their space is going to come on the market. Then there's potential space in Penn Station, which we didn't even talk about over here. You know, if somebody's going to maybe take the space at the Hotel Pennsylvania, then you know, Steve Ross and Steve Roth aren't going to be sitting quietly in the Penn Station area. They're going to want to build also.
But the key here is the question of, it's not the overall quantity of the space, it's the pacing of the space.
Absolutely. It's like if a snake eats a pig, it's going to be sleep for 6 months digesting the pig. At the end of the day, it's really a function of when it gets put on the market. We count, there's about 3,700,000 people employed in New York, of which about 1,300,000, 1,400,000 are office workers. Not everybody, a hotel worker doesn't need office space. So at the end of the day, we average about a 1.5% over a long period of time of growth, which would probably yield a requirement of about 3 to 4 million square feet. So over a long period of time, you're going to need, you know, if you look at the next 10 years or so to 15 years, you'll need 30 million square feet, 40 million square feet of space. The question is, it's really not an efficient market, and so if all of a sudden you have a bunch of guys who say, let's go to the Hudson Yards, they pick up their bags, they take 5-6 million square feet, occupy Hudson Yards, and they give up the space they come from, you're going to have a moment in time, whether that's 2013 to 2016, where theoretically you can have 10 or 15 million square feet sitting on the market in a 3-year period, which will create an oversupply at that moment, which will have to be absorbed over time.
But generally they don't move from 5 million square feet to 5 million square feet. They move from 3 million square feet to 5 million square feet. So it really isn't a net
and not always
trade.
Not always. Companies, depending on the economy, companies look to move from high-cost locations to low-cost locations. They look to consolidate and compress their envelope. If companies grow by acquiring companies, then they're looking to create efficiencies and synergies, and they will consolidate, as Condé Nast did in Times Square. And it doesn't always add up to the total envelope that they might have had prior. So it isn't always the case.
But there are many people who do it the opposite as well, who are moving from...
I don't want to be Manhattan-centric, but all I'm hearing is Manhattan in certain aspects.
Oh.
There is Brooklyn, okay? You know, Ratner at the yards, at the other yards, Atlantic yards, there is office component.
But only 500,000 square feet and change.
There is, in Long Island City, one day Tishman Speyer on Tishman Speyer Models, you know, is going to have some office space over there.
Michael,
Minskoff,
600,000
you have
square foot
600,000 square feet space. Okay, you're not going to see what the Elcor space, which was originally planned on the water over there, but you have that.
That'll be residential.
No, the water will, but I'm talking about where Tishman Speyer space, which is 4 million square feet potentially, plus 600,000 that you have over there. Then you have Brooklyn space, and you know there is something, you know, people, you know, Josh Muss that wouldn't say, but certain people consider Jersey City the sixth borough. You know, people, you know, there are other spaces and there are alternatives. I mean, you lease space in New Jersey, you have operations in New Jersey. What's the differential for being a Class A building in Manhattan and to be in Jersey City?
But, you know, it's funny. I have to disagree that I don't actually think people are moving to be in cheaper space. I actually think that the nature of the workforce has changed so dramatically in Manhattan that people are by and large moving for better space and willing to pay more for the space than what they've historically been able to pay. And therefore, what happens with the outer boroughs and with the Jersey coast is that that's where other kinds of jobs exist than you would house in Manhattan. It's basically a very different workforce.
I think people from Manhattan get dragged there kicking and screaming.
Right.
And that's the MetLife example is the perfect example of they thought that they were going to make a lifestyle.
MetLife is a bad example.
The MetLife
now, why is it a bad example?
Because it was front office.
It was front office.
It was not a back.
No, 50% of the space is being retained right now. They are going to keep half of the space over there.
Let's wait and see.
I apologize, it might be a bad example, but I think there are Goldman Sachs examples. I think there are all kinds of investment banking or other types of tenant examples who thought they were doing the right thing by relocating their offices out to the Jersey coast or Brooklyn and found 5 years later that their employees were no longer the service workers who were commuting in from Long Island or Jersey, but were the young kids who were the ones who were renting the very expensive apartments in two or three people living in a one bedroom.
The knowledge worker and the deal people are going to be in Manhattan. They're not moving out of Manhattan. That is not going to change, except if, for example, in Stamford, Connecticut, where you have several trading operations, if there was a critical mass of trading operations in Stamford where there is a catchment pool of employees that could create its own market, New York could be at risk on the trading side. But generally, you're not going to see that. As companies grow, there's a level of employee, whether it's a $60,000 to $70,000 to $80,000 a year employee, where the cost of keeping that employee in New York City is prohibitive. So what happens is, when you look at the investment banks, The bulk of their money on a global basis is made in structured products, derivatives, all of the esoteric kinds of things that they do, which are in New York. So what happens as they grow...
But Barry, you have a company called RBS Greenwich Capital, who has nothing in New York. They live in Greenwich, Connecticut. And they're going to be moving out of Greenwich, Connecticut to moving to Stanford. So, you know, not everybody, you know...
And that's a risk. And that is
one
of those
as a percentage of the industry, it's de minimis. I mean, it's the way you feel about the outer boroughs. It's not, to date, it hasn't been material.
I was going to say that one of the things that's interesting is the whole idea of the trading floors in Stanford and everyone moving up there now with all of the new sites that everyone's talking about, either in Hudson Yards or the Trade Center. Everyone's talking about now large sites with large trading floor operations. So New York City developers are saying...
When I've done shows about Jersey City, Mitch Hirsch, Steve Pizicki, Richard Lefrak, and the Westchester guys will tell you that it's less expensive to build, even though the materials are the same price, in those areas than to build in New York City.
Not a question. The question is just where do the people who are going to sit at those desks want to be, and how do the companies attract those people? And it's finding locations in Manhattan to do it.
Michael, it's not the rent that is the driver for companies. One of the classic misperceptions that I think real estate people always have, because they always think in real estate terms, if you speak to a typical developer, he'll say, but my building's cheaper. And I'll say, it's not if they can't get the right people to work in your building. It's about attracting and retaining the employees who make it possible.
You know, it's interesting. Barry has two lives, okay?
But it's more than that, actually. When you look at why a company relocates out of Manhattan, there are several reasons. A small reason is the rent. It's either the wage contours in an alternative location are significantly less, which that eliminates the 20 million people feeder system in the tri-state region. It's going to be taxes. The marginal tax rate in New York State is 11.2%. And in Jersey City, there are no taxes. And there's a BEAT program which allows for forgiveness of the payroll tax to the tune of 80%. And when you add those numbers up, it matters.
But Barry, if a company relocates to Harlem, in Vornado's new building, they have a REAP, they have pilot programs, they won't pay real estate taxes. If they go to Long Island City, the same thing, and that's not going over the river. Okay.
But a REAP doesn't. Another misconception is that the REAP is a benefit. The fact is the REAP only mitigates New York City taxes. In Jersey City, you have no taxes to mitigate. So they start at 0, we start at 7.65%, and it's mitigated by the REAP program. So the economics have to be very compelling to move people out of New York because, like Marianne says, it's about the people, it's about creativity, it's about deal making, and productivity is where these companies make it up. And you cannot get the same kind of output in Jersey City or Connecticut that you can get in Manhattan. For some reason, this place yields a tremendous amount of productivity, which is why people are looking to move trading operations here and expand it and consolidate in New York, and that's why the market's relatively robust. And that will continue as long as we have a global market. New York's still the financial capital of the world, and it has there are threats to that. But if we can maintain our status as the financial capital of the world, the rent is an insignificant component of their operations. However, large companies that have significant blocks of employees here at the 80,000, 90,000 and under level will look for ways to take those employees and bring those functions out of the headquarters and move them to cheaper locations, which doesn't necessarily mean Jersey. It means
right. But
Tampa.
we were saying before. No, we weren't. I was saying before. When I taped my segment for 1010 Wins, they're at 888 7th Avenue today. They're probably paying $50 a foot. When Viacom made a decision to relocate, they said, we're not paying $100 a foot. We want to stay in New York City. They didn't say we want to move to New Jersey. We want to stay in New York City. They evaluated Long Island City, and they found Trinity Real Estate's Hudson Square, which at one time, nobody wanted to go down there. I mean, When Minskoff 101 Avenue of the Americas, it was not a neighborhood. But now that neighborhood, it doesn't matter. It's anywhere in the city is a location, as you were saying. Midtown is no longer ending at 34th Street.
Right.
But so the idea is companies will relocate, and they have to look, you know, financial services one market, but the other companies have to look at earnings per share. And when Viacom is looking at earnings per share, or when even Time Warner is saying, you know, hey, Time Warner Center is nice, we own the property, but maybe we can go a couple of blocks away between 8th and 9th Avenue.
But if you're a global company and you're looking at your EPS over your entire portfolio of companies, and you're talking about the headquarters location, and you're talking about the people who are really the idea, the deal generators, et cetera, you're going to have a different tolerance level. We see this in law firms all the time. They say, how can these law firms possibly pay these prices? And we say, take a look at their, the full breadth of the law firm and realize what they're housing and what they're billing in New York City, and you'll understand why they can justify these prices.
I mean, I think law firms is the perfect example of the type of tenant that, you know, has to stay in New York, will continue to grow in New York, and needs to be able to attract.
I don't really disagree with you, but Rob Ivanhoe, who heads the real estate practice of Greenberg, said to me on a show that last year he wanted to take additional space in your building.
He wanted to take it from us.
Okay, he wanted to take
We
additional
wouldn't give it
space,
up.
and what happened was he didn't take it, and he moved a portion of his partners and back office staff to White Plains. Okay, and he saved because let's look at a law firm. A law firm it's their pocket, it's partners,
But Michael,
and the
you
partner
said
is the profitability.
You told the story, but you came to the wrong conclusion. They started by wanting to stay and trying to get space for Marianne, and it was only their second or third choice that was to move people to White
But
Plains.
then it was an economic decision also.
No.
But it
But
wasn't.
people are-
It wasn't. It was the
Law-
only decision that was left for them after they couldn't fulfill
I will
They
guarantee
couldn't have
you-
found another spot.
I will guarantee you that there is something in that story we don't know. One of the things we've learned, there's a group of partners who live in Westchester who want to do, or whose particular practice makes them go out of town often.
There
Or
are-
doesn't it meet with a lot of
Why
clients?
did
Yes.
companies, why did Darby and Darby move down to Larry Silverstein's building at 7 World?
Price.
I hear that word, price.
I have to tell you something. I don't think a single tenant that moved into 7 World Trade Center who didn't go downtown and
We
look
represented
for
Darby, so
price.
I
I know
would-
that you did, but let me say it to you.
I didn't know,
Who
but
didn't
please.
come down with the notion that it was all about price, got there and said, you know what? This is so much better. A work environment. Look what's happening with the transportation. They didn't feel, you can't tell me that Darby and Darby thought that they were slumming and they were doing
it's
it
a
to
beautiful
save
building.
money.
It's not the point. It's not the point.
I think it's part of the point.
They look downtown for price, and anybody that looks downtown is going to look because of the differential. They're not going to look because now they'll take into consideration the fact that what's my alternative at $60 or so? Do I go to the Broadway corridor, or do I go to 7 World? And it's a choice of quality of building versus downtown, and they'll make that choice. But price is a thing that drives people to go downtown, and in concert with the quality of the building, which was the case in Darby and Darby. But price is a factor. With law firms, there are functions that they can move out of the headquarters facility. So when you have a law firm, conflict resolution, accounting, billing, things like that can be moved out, aren't
Barry,
critical.
let's remember after 9/11, let's remember what has happened. A lot of companies, downtown vacancy factor is at an all-time record low.
That's exactly right. And the rents are at the highest they've
At the
ever been.
highest
Right.
they've been in years.
No, ever.
Ever. Okay, so the idea is people relocated downtown. White people relocated downtown.
I think, by the way, in the first instance, you had to look. Because if you were being careful, financially careful, you had to look. I think for the companies that moved down there, they had the recognition, again, going back to the employees, that this was an environment that didn't close down at 6 o'clock as it did in the old days, that didn't prevent their employees from
But that puts
shopping
them in
during the
game.
day and whatever.
That's a necessity. That sets the bar at a minimum. At the minimum, downtown has changed. It has shops. It has housing.
It has residents.
Over
It
the
has
years,
lots of residents, but the retail still is lacking.
So
Coming
it's
along.
better.
Your-
It's getting better.
Your
We're-
building.
Thanksgiving, we'll have Bed Bath and Barnes & Noble open, and then probably by the spring, Whole Foods. So
it's all additive. Eventually, downtown is a great long term. Downtown is going to be terrific. and it gets better every single day with every new thing that opens.
Right, I mean Stone Street and everything
no
else.
question about it.
The
it's
great
all
Litwin's new rental building.
If you spend any time down there on the
Beautiful
weekends
buildings.
now, the number of people pushing strollers, women pushing strollers, couples walking with babies, all around downtown.
I mean,
it's
downtown
amazing.
is the largest tourist attraction in the world. More people go downtown on
Is
the
that
weekend.
so?
Okay, it is.
I didn't
It's
realize
become
that.
the largest tourist attraction. They want to go see the Trade Center site, and you can't. Normally in the hospitality business, you're slow on the weekend. You're busy during the week. They're busier on the weekend, and this is what's happening downtown. The amount of buses, the streets are packed with buses.
It all boils down to the same whole thing: employment. At the end, you can't push a rope. At some point, if there's employment driving the market from the bottom up, it's gonna all blend in and make it better in downtown, make it better in midtown.
Employment is one. You know, before the Fed cut their rate, I heard this term recession. Okay, and I hear that, and you know, subprime is one aspect, but I can tell you, living in the investment sales world, sales are down. Some of these mortgage broker, you know, CMBS shops who were bad, who basically didn't do good deals. You know, this is having an effect on sales. It's having an effect in general. What happens if there's a recession? What happens to the office market?
Well, I still think New York will continue to be, you know, as Barry said earlier, I mean, I think that it will remain robust. It may not be driving at the same speed that it was for the last year, but I still think that you'll see the same type of vacancy issues and availability issues stay where they are.
I think because it takes so long to build a building in New York, and we are so supply constrained, and even though there are a lot more sites now that are coming online and that people are talking about, if indeed, even though there's no immediate indication if something were to occur, I think what would happen is you'd see a lot fewer people building buildings, and therefore we'd constrain our supply, and sure, rents at that point you'd begin to see make some kind of correction, but I don't really think that we've never been better positioned as a city to take what may come.
In 1998, when we had the Hang Seng crisis and the Russian crisis, there was minimal impact on employment in that period of time. From 2001 to right after 9/11, we had about 30,000 jobs lost, 30 to 33,000 jobs. I mean, we've done some more than back of the envelope calculations,
right.
And if we do go into a significant credit crunch, you know, if it's 10 to 15,000 jobs, and you add up all the jobs, probably they will be dispersed enough not to have that significant an impact on the amount of space that's put back on the market. As I said prior to this, I think the market, some may disagree, I think the market will stabilize and remain at some levels high but flat, excepting for the handful of very top of the market, the buildings, the dozen buildings or so that attract the hedge fund and private equity firms, and that market will always be in high demand and demand very, very high prices.
Hard to believe. We've completed 30 minutes. I'd like to thank, I think, my audience, and I got a good opinion of what's happening in the office market. We'll probably have many of you back again to talk about it in the months ahead. I'd like to thank Mary Ann Tighe, Barry Gossin, and Jeff Sussman. Next week, we're going to talk to some owners who truly are developing in Times Square. See you next week.
Major funding for this program is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Allied Partners, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, GREENBERG TRAURIG. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman & Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Massey KNAKAL Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Must Development, LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, PALIN Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Inc., Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Studley, Stonehenge Partners, SWIG Equities, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.